Jezebel's End, the worst deaths in the Bible, and a warning against the abuse of power. Mystic world. Jezebel, one of the Bible's most infamous figures, met a fate so horrific that it continues to resonate as a powerful warning against the dangers of unchecked power and moral decay. But what drove this queen to such a grisly end? How did her ruthless ambition and manipulation lead to one of the most shocking deaths in biblical history? In this following video, we'll explore the chilling tale of Jezebel's downfall, raising questions about the true cost of abusing authority and whether her story offers a timeless lesson that still holds relevance today. Jezebel was the first to introduce the worship of Baal in Israel. The day Jezebel died was unlike any other in Jezreel, an ancient city and the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. This day would bring the execution of the infamous Jezebel, the prime offender in the house of Ahab. It was Jezebel who introduced Baal worship. Baal was the name of the god worshipped throughout all of Canaan and Phoenicia in ancient times, particularly during the period of the Judges. Baal worship infiltrated Jewish religious life, becoming widespread in Israel during the reign of Ahab and even affecting Judah. Different regions worship Baal in various ways, and Baal proved to be a highly universal god. Various local communities highlighted one or another of his attributes and created special sects of Baal worship. These local Baals were considered responsible for agriculture, livestock, and the fertility of humanity. The most significant use of the title in the Old Testament is its reference to the great god of the Canaanite pantheon, equated with Hadad, the Amorite god whose nature and functions were nearly identical. Jezebel also killed the prophets of the Lord and incited her husband first and then her sons to do evil. She was a curse to the country, and all those who wished well for their country saw her as accursed. Her reign lasted 3 reigns, but now finally her day had come to fall. We read about a false prophetess in the church of Thyatira who was compared to Jezebel and called by her name in Revelation 2:20. But I have this against you, that you tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. Jezebel was incredibly evil, leading the followers of God into idolatry. Her terrible end came just as it had been foretold. The destruction of Jezebel can be seen as typical of the destruction of idolaters and persecutors, as described in Revelation 17:5-6. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman, drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. How did Jezebel deceive and seize Naboth's land? A general named Jehu was coming for her. Jehu was not an ordinary person. He was the instrument of judgment that God had placed upon Jezebel's family. All this came upon Jezebel because of one event, the murder of Naboth. Jezebel had murdered a man named Naboth to steal his property, and the prophet Elijah had placed a curse on her and her family. Naboth was a Jezreelite who owned a vineyard in Jezreel that was situated close to the palace of King Ahab. Because it was so close to the palace, Ahab desired to have it for himself. Ahab thought it would be a good idea to turn Naboth's vineyard into a vegetable garden. Therefore the king proposed to compensate Naboth for his vineyard, or provide him with a much better vineyard in another location. However, Naboth did not want to give up the property he had inherited from his ancestors, and he declared that the land would not be sold at any price. Unable to acquire Naboth's vineyard, Ahab became sullen and returned to his house in a dark and angry mood. The king's fit of anger caused him to abstain from food. Queen Jezebel discovered that her husband was discontented within the palace and questioned him about the reason for his mood. Ahab told her the story about Naboth. Jezebel assured him that as long as he remained king, he could have whatever he wanted in the world. Then she assured him that she would take care of it personally, saying, "Arise and eat, cheer up, I will get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." 1 Kings 21:7. Jezebel then proceeded with the necessary arrangements to get rid of Naboth. First, she forged letters supposedly from the king, instructing the city's nobles and elders to proclaim a fast and place Naboth in a prominent place among the people. 2 scoundrels were to be positioned near Naboth with the mission of falsely accusing him of cursing both God and the king. Naboth was to be taken outside the city, where he would then be stoned to death. These accusations were completely fabricated. The diabolical plot against Naboth was successful because a death sentence could not be executed based on just one witness. Jezebel had taken the necessary precautions to plant 2 false witnesses, thus complying with the law when it was convenient for her. She manipulated the situation in a way that made it easy for her to lie, steal, and murder. A particularly odious part of Jezebel's plan was the proclamation of a day of fasting, using a religious ceremony to cover up her murderous intent and ensure that Naboth's presence was vilified to the extreme. When the queen learned that Naboth had died, she informed Ahab that he could now take control of Naboth's vineyard, which Ahab did more than gladly. Let me take a brief pause for asking you leave your comments below this video. Say with us your opinion about Jezebel and her story so far. You can share your opinions, your experience, and all of us can enhance our spiritual journeys, having grateful approach to life. How did God punish Jezebel and her husband? Because of the shocking murder of Naboth by Ahab and Jezebel, God condemned them both. The prophet Elijah made his way to the monarch to deliver a word from God. In fact, Elijah first crossed paths with Ahab when the king was inspecting the vineyard he had stolen. The prophet asked, "Have you not murdered a man and seized his property? This is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick your blood, yes, yours." 1 Kings 21:19. Next, Elijah prophesied that the Lord would bring disaster on Ahab's house, and that the Lord would cause every male in Ahab's family to perish and be devoured by wild animals instead of receiving an honorable burial. Ahab, Jezebel's husband, was killed in a battle against the Syrians, fulfilling part of Elijah's prophecy. As Elijah's successor and a prophet in his own right, Elisha picked up Elijah's crusade. Elisha anointed Jehu as king of Israel. Jehu had already disposed of Jezebel's son Joram. Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. Here we see Jezebel defying the judgment that was to come. She knew that Jehu had executed her son and had thrown his dead body onto Naboth's plot, according to the word of the Lord, and that he was now coming to Jezreel. She could not help but expect to be next to fall as a sacrifice to Jehu's furious sword. Jezebel heard about this and now faces her fate. She positioned herself in a window at the entrance of the gate to confront Jehu and defy him. She did not choose to hide, as someone terrified of divine vengeance might. Instead, she exposed herself to it, scorning the idea of backing down. She mocked fear. See how a heart hardened against God will try to face him, but never has anyone hardened their heart against him and prospered. Instead of showing humility and mourning for her son, Jezebel painted her face so she could look like herself, grand and majestic, in the hope that this would intimidate Jehu, make him lose face, and end his political career. The Lord God commanded his people to shave their heads and wrap themselves in sackcloth, but Jezebel chose instead to paint and dress herself, walking contrary to God's commands. Jezebel confronts Jehu. Isaiah 22:12-13 says, "Therefore in that day the Lord God of hosts called you to weeping, to mourning, to shaving the head and to wearing sackcloth in humiliation. Instead, there is joy and gladness, killing of oxen and slaughtering of sheep, eating meat and drinking wine, saying, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." One of the surest signs of ruin is an unrepentant heart in times of adversity. Let those who trust in outward appearances examine themselves in a mirror. She did not tremble before Jehu, the instrument of God's vengeance. Instead, she posed to him the menacing question of whether Zimri had peace after killing his master. Notice, despite God's hand being against her family, she did not care but flew in the face of the one who was merely the sword in his hand. We are too prone, when in trouble, to explode in anger against the instruments of our trouble when we should be submissive to God and only angry with ourselves. She comforted herself with the belief that Jehu's current actions would ultimately result in his own ruin and that he would not find peace in them. She sought to cut him off from all pretensions to peace, just as she thought to cut him off in the same way. Reformers and reprovers who take action may face difficulties, but they should not be afraid. Philippians 1:28 says, "And in no way be alarmed or intimidated by anything from your opponents, for such steadiness and absence of fear on your part is a clear sign, proof and seal to them of their imminent destruction, but a clear sign to you of deliverance and salvation, and that too from God." Jezebel cited a precedent to discourage Jehu from proceeding with his venture. Did Zimri have peace? Who is the Zimri of whom Queen Jezebel speaks? The man coming for her life was called Jehu, not Zimri. This Zimri was a man who came to the throne through blood and betrayal, and within 7 days was compelled to set the palace on fire over his head and himself within it. Jezebel was essentially telling Jehu, "Can you expect to fare any better?" But this was not a similar case. If the case had been similar, it would have been appropriate to provide this reminder, for God's judgments on those who preceded us in any sinful way should be warnings to us to be careful not to tread in their footsteps. If you find this content intriguing, I encourage you to support us with your subscription. Hit the bell button so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. How did Jehu carry out God's command? It was a mistake to compare Jehu with Zimri. While Zimri's actions were motivated solely by his own selfish desires and cruelty, Jehu was anointed by a prophet and carried out his actions by orders from heaven. In comparing people and things, we must be careful to distinguish between the precious and the vile. Jehu called for help against the woman, unmoved by her threats, and shouted, "Who is with me?" According to 2 Kings 9:32, then Jehu lifted his face to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He was called to do God's work in reforming the land and punishing those who had corrupted it. He now sought assistance in this task, hoping that others would be willing to help and support him. He raised the standard and made a proclamation, like Moses, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And the psalmist, "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity?" Psalm 94:16. Note that once the work of reform began, it was time to inquire who was in favor of it. Her own attendants betrayed her and delivered her to him to carry out his rightful vengeance. The 2 or 3 eunuchs looked at Jehu with such a countenance that encouraged him to believe they were on his side, and to them he called, not to arrest or secure her until further orders, but rather to immediately throw her down, which was a way of stoning criminals by casting them head first from some steep place. As a result, she experienced the repercussions of the stoning she had inflicted on Naboth. They threw her down, according to 2 Kings 9:33, and he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and he trampled on her. If God's command could justify Jehu, then Jehu's command could justify them too. It's possible they had a hidden dislike for Jezebel's wickedness and hated her, despite the fact that they served her. It's also possible that she was cruel and harmful to those around her, and they were pleased with the opportunity to take revenge on her. Finally, it's possible they did this because they saw Jehu's success and hoped to ingratiate themselves with him and maintain their positions in his court. She was thrown against the wall and the pavement, and then the horses, all covered in her blood, trampled on her while she was still alive. This was the most shameful way she could have been put to death. Witness the destruction of pride and cruelty, and then declare that the Lord is just. The very dogs completed her shame and ruin according to prophecy. After Jehu had refreshed himself in the palace, he thought to himself that the best way to show respect for Jezebel was to bury her. Despite the fact that she was a terrible person, she was a daughter of a king, wife of the monarch, and mother of the king. According to 2 Kings 9:34, when he had gone in, he ate and drank and said, "See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." The tragic death of the God opposer. But although he had forgotten what the prophet said, God had not forgotten. According to 2 Kings 9:10, "And the dogs shall eat Jezebel's body in the territory of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her." While he was eating and drinking, the dogs devoured her dead body, so that nothing was left but her bare skull, the painted face gone, and her feet and hands. According to 2 Kings 9:35, they went to bury her, but they found nothing of her except the skull, the feet, and the palms of her hands. The ravenous dogs had no respect for the dignity of her lineage. To them, a king's daughter was on the same level as anyone else. Even if we pamper our bodies and use them luxuriously, we must know how soon they will be a feast for the worms beneath the earth. When Jehu was informed of this, he remembered the terrifying words that had been previously said in 1 Kings 21:23. The Lord also spoke concerning Jezebel, saying, "Dogs shall eat the body of Jezebel by the district of Jezreel." Nothing was to remain of her but the monuments of her infamy. She was accustomed to making her appearances on public days in an incredible state of glamour, and the reaction would always be, "This is Jezebel. What an absolutely magnificent stature and figure. I can't believe how beautiful she is." However, from this point forward, that would not be repeated. We often witness the wicked being buried, as Ecclesiastes 8:10 says, "So I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, yet they were forgotten in the city where they had so done." This also is vanity. Yet sometimes, as here, the wicked have no burial. Ecclesiastes 6:3 states, "If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, and his soul is not filled with good, and also that he has no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he." There was no trace of Jezebel left except in the sacred texts. No one dared say things like, "This is Jezebel's grave." Therefore, the name of the wicked will rot and be forgotten even above ground. What consequences did idol worshippers like Jezebel face according to the Bible? Jezebel is one of the idolaters, and the Bible have told about a religion which is idolatry. Babylon is one of the most famous idolatry. Emerging from the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, the religion of Babylon played a pivotal role in shaping not only the spiritual life of its people, but also the development of other cultures and religions across the ancient Near East. This intricate system of beliefs, rituals, and deities reflects the complexities of Babylonian society and its enduring legacy. The city of Babylon holds a significant place in biblical narrative, often depicted as the epitome of idolatry and moral decay. From its rise as a mighty empire to its symbolic representation of evil in the Book of Revelation, Babylon serves as a powerful illustration of the consequences of turning away from God and embracing false idols. This essay delves into the biblical portrayal of Babylon, exploring its historical and spiritual significance as a warning against the dangers of idolatry. Babylon, located in modern-day Iraq, was one of the most influential cities of the ancient world. Known for its impressive architecture, including the legendary Hanging Gardens, Babylon was a center of wealth, power, and culture. However, alongside its grandeur, Babylon was also renowned for its rampant idolatry. The city was filled with temples dedicated to various gods, with Marduk, the chief deity, being the most prominent. The Bible's first significant reference to Babylon appears in Genesis 11, in the story of the Tower of Babel. The people of Babel sought to build a tower that reached the heavens, symbolizing their desire to make a name for themselves apart from God. God, displeased with their pride and self-sufficiency, confused their language and scattered them across the earth. This event marks the beginning of Babylon's association with rebellion against God and the pursuit of idolatry. The prophet Isaiah offers a vivid portrayal of Babylon's fate as a consequence of its idolatry and arrogance. In Isaiah 13-14, Babylon is depicted as a proud and mighty nation destined for destruction. The prophecy foretells the fall of Babylon as a divine judgment against its wickedness, particularly its reliance on false gods and its oppression of other nations. Isaiah 47 provides a scathing indictment of Babylon's spiritual state, describing the city as the queen of kingdoms who relied on sorcery and enchantments. The chapter highlights the futility of Babylon's idols and the inevitable downfall that awaits those who place their trust in anything other than the true God. Isaiah's prophecies served as a warning not only to Babylon but to all nations and individuals who would follow its example of idolatry and self-exaltation. The fall of Babylon to the Medes and Persians in 539 BC is one of the most significant events in biblical history, fulfilling the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel. The book of Daniel recounts the dramatic events leading up to Babylon's downfall, including the famous writing on the wall during King Belshazzar's feast, which foretold the imminent end of the Babylonian Empire. Jeremiah 51 also prophesies Babylon's destruction, emphasizing that its downfall is a direct result of its idolatry and defiance of God. The city that once symbolized human achievement and power became a desolate ruin, a testament to the transient nature of earthly kingdoms and the consequences of turning away from God. In the New Testament, Babylon takes on a more symbolic role, representing the ultimate embodiment of evil and opposition to God. The book of Revelation describes Babylon the Great as a harlot who leads nations astray with her idolatry and immorality. Revelation 17-18 vividly portrays the fall of this symbolic Babylon, emphasizing the complete and utter destruction that comes to those who oppose God's authority. The imagery of Babylon in Revelation serves as a powerful reminder of the spiritual battle between good and evil, with Babylon representing the forces of darkness that seek to lead humanity away from God. The ultimate destruction of Babylon in Revelation signifies the final victory of God over all forms of idolatry and wickedness. The Bible's portrayal of Babylon as a center of idolatry serves as a timeless warning against the dangers of turning away from God and placing trust in false gods, whether they be literal idols or modern-day substitutes like wealth, power, or status. Babylon's rise and fall remind us that no earthly power can stand against God's judgment, and that the pursuit of anything other than Him ultimately leads to destruction. As the story of Babylon demonstrates, the path of idolatry is one that leads to ruin, but for those who choose to follow God, there is hope and redemption. The story of Jezebel, from her introduction of idolatrous practices to her tragic end, serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of rebellion against God and wickedness. She symbolizes the danger of straying from God's ways and the severe consequences for those who lead others into sin. Her story is not just a historical account. It serves as an allegory of divine judgment against idolatry, injustice, and immorality. The judgment upon Jezebel also reflects the biblical theme that God does not leave sin unpunished. Jezebel's death, prophesied by Elijah as an act of divine justice, is dramatically fulfilled and serves as a solemn reminder of God's sovereignty and the fate of those who oppose him. Furthermore, Jezebel's story is a warning against the abuse of power. Jezebel used her position to persecute God's prophets and promote the worship of false gods, culminating in the death of Naboth and the usurpation of his vineyard. Her ability to manipulate and control to achieve her ends reveals the destructive nature of power when used for unjust purposes. On the other hand, the story encourages us to be resilient in faith, even in the face of great opposition. Many of God's prophets faced persecution under the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, but remained faithful. This resilience and unwavering faith are qualities every believer is called to emulate, trusting that God is just and will reward righteousness. If this content was valuable to you, I ask for your support with your subscription, and feel free to watch other of our videos together. We can enlighten more minds and expand the Word of God. Thank you for being here, and may God bless you, and may